I work at a nuclear power plant, the shocking truth that haunts us alone at 3 a.m. The air was thick with tension as the clock struck 3. In the eerie silence of the dimly lit control room, shadows danced against the walls, and the hum of machinery seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. It's hard to explain the chill that clutched at Eric's chest. He'd been at the power plant for 5 years, but tonight felt different. Tonight, secrets whispered through the sterile corridors, a chilling invitation to horrors unseen. A flicker of fluorescent lights overhead sent a jolt through him. Why do the lights flicker? It never did that before. His pulse quickened as he eyed the monitoring screens. Each dial and gauge pulsed with an ominous glow, numbers flashing like a countdown to an unknown disaster. He felt it in his bones, something was wrong. And then it happened, an outburst of static echoed as the radio crackled to life. Hello? Is anyone there? The voice was shaky, panicked. It wasn't supposed to be on. There was no one else on shift. Eric could feel the lump rise in his throat as he remembered an old tale that had circulated among workers. They said voices from the past still lingered in the plant, echoing the cries of those who were lost. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought, but the air felt thicker. His hands trembled as he adjusted the knobs, tuning into the strange static. If this is a joke, it's not funny, he muttered, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh. That's when a low rumble shook the ground beneath him. Is this even real? He whispered to himself, eyes wide. He could hardly breathe as a crimson light blinked on one of the gauges. An alarm pierced the stillness, a banshee wail cutting through the dawn of dread rising within him. Before I go any further, let me tell you something important that's happening. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference, let's connect. The alarm blared louder. Heart racing, Eric glanced around, every shadow now a potential threat, every creak of this metallic beast echoing the horror stories of yesteryear. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping to wake from this nightmare, but the claustrophobic feeling only intensified. Suddenly, the lights dimmed even further, and a figure flickered at the edge of his vision. He whipped around, nothing. Just shadows. But something was there. He could sense it, like icy fingers trailing along his spine, feeding off his fear. What awaited him in the depths of the power plant? As the alarms faded into a deafening silence, the air grew heavier, pregnant with dread. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. What had he stumbled upon in those haunted hours? The stories swirling into horrific realities he never wished to confront. A chilling shiver ran down Eric's spine as the silence wrapped around him like a thick fog. The absence of sound was overwhelming. The flickering lights cast ghostly shadows that skittered across the walls, and he could swear they were more than just tricks of the light. The unease gnawed at him, drawing him deeper into the plant's uncanny depths that he forced himself to focus on the screens before him. Readouts danced, some indicating normal readings while others blipped with disturbing alerts. An unsettling thrum fluttered ominously in his chest. This isn't happening, he muttered, his voice barely escaping his lips. Just then, a clatter echoed from the corridor outside, jolting him upright. He squinted through the glass partition, half expecting to see a colleague playing some sick prank. But the hall was empty. Is anyone there? He called hesitantly, his voice trembling. He strained to hear a reply, but only the soft hum of machines filled the air. Alone, again. Then came the whisper, barely audible, like a caress against his ear. Help us. The voice was undeniably real, hauntingly familiar. It sent a tide of icy dread crashing like a wave over him. He had heard this sound before, in hushed conversations among the workers. The old stories of those who were trapped during the last meltdown, the souls that never left, panic clawed at his throat as he grappled with the decision. Should he check it out? What if the tales were true? But the pulse of fear drove him forward. He had to know. Grabbing a flashlight, he stood and stepped into the corridor, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat of impending doom. He turned the corner, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the gloom. The space felt alive, vibrational energy crackling like electricity in the air around him. He took a deep breath, letting the coolness clear his racing thoughts. "Hello? Is anyone there?" He called again, louder this time. Silence, but then a glimmer caught his eye. A flicker of movement at the end of the hall. He froze, heart in his throat. In that moment, the fluorescent lights began to flicker wildly, casting frantic shadows that shaped into swirling figures, forms of anguish and despair. He squinted, trying to make sense of what his mind was conjuring up. Suddenly, the lights went out completely, plunging him into darkness. The only sound was the rapid pounding of his heart, thrumming in his ears. "No, no, no," he whispered, panic flooding his senses. What if he wasn't meant to uncover this hidden truth? Sparks erupted in the distance, illuminating faces disembodied and sorrowful. He staggered backward, breath hitching as he realized that these weren't mere shadows of his imagination, they were the apparitions of lost workers trapped in a limbo he couldn't understand. "Eric!" The voice pulled him in, a chilling siren-esque call that both terrified and mesmerized him. "Stay away!" he shouted, but it felt futile as the figures drifted closer, their mournful expressions twisting into grotesque forms that clawed at his sanity. Hands reached out as if trying to pull him into their abyss. He spun around, racing back toward the control room, mind racing. The alarms burst back to life like angry banshees, the shrill sound wrapping around him like chains. He could feel the weight of the past pressing against his chest, their silent screams echoing in his mind. As he flung himself back into the safety of the control room, the radio crackled once more, a distorted voice whispering through static, "It's not what it seems, you have to choose." Eric's heart plummeted. What choice? Which truth was he meant to uncover? The walls around him began to close in, every breath heavier than the last. He dissected the unfolding horror, knowing something was watching. The shadows weren't just memories, they were a warning. What had he stumbled upon in this cursed hour? And what would it demand of him next? The control room felt smaller, suffocating. Eric's palms were slick against the cool metal of the console. The relentless wail of alarms glided through his mind like shards of ice, drawing him deeper into despair. No one was coming to help him. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He spun towards the glass wall, peering into the abyss of the shadows. The flickering lights cast grotesque shapes that twisted with the illusion of movement, dark figures flitting just out of reach. They were there, and yet not. What did they want? Why now? The cold sweat running down his back felt like a physical weight, anchoring him in place. "Get a grip," he whispered to himself, fighting back the tide of panic. He clenched his fists, grounding himself even as his heart raced. He could hear their voices, the whispered cries blending into a mournful choir, "Help us, save us." It was maddening. What choice? His mind raced, struggling to grasp the meaning behind the ghostly whispers. The radio crackled in and out, the static seeming to pulse with a life of its own, adding to the disorienting chaos. "You have to choose," the phrase repeated in his head like a warped gramophone. What choice? What truth? Retrieving the flashlight, Eric's determination hardened. "I'm not done yet," he said firmly, turning back toward the thrumming darkness of the plant. He had to confront whatever haunted these halls. It was time to uncover the nightmare lurking within the shadows. With the beam of light piercing the inky void, he stepped out of the control room. The corridor stretched before him, a gaping maw ready to swallow him whole. He moved forward, methodical and careful. The cold air prickled against his skin, urging him to hurry, to escape, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something waited for him. He approached the area where the flicker had first drawn his attention, and as he rounded the corner, the lights flickered to life, revealing a terrible sight. There, etched into the wall, was a message done in what looked like dried blood. "They didn't listen," it read, and the sight sent a chill through his bones. Eric's breath hitched, and he raised the flashlight. As the beam illuminated the walls further, he could see faint outlines of faces, their mouths silently screaming, eyes wide in terror. The ghosts of the past crowded around him, their desperation palpable. This plant had histories buried deep within its foundations, and they were clamoring to be set free. Gulps of fear clawed at his throat. Could their suffering be a part of his choice? He wrestled with the thought, the moral gravity settling over him like a heavy shroud. Suddenly, a loud clang reverberated behind him, drowning the echoes of the ghostly cries. Heart racing, he turned the flashlight on the source. A metal door swung open, deeper into the plant's heart. The sound was deafening, a sinister invitation that beckoned him forward. He hesitated, the weight of unseen eyes on him. "Go on," whispered an echo that felt both a command and a plea. That he knew he was crossing a threshold, one that could lead to the truth he desperately sought or further into the darkness that had already swallowed so many. What awaited him beyond that door? As he edged closer, a voice, low and sinister, coiled around him. "You may not return." His mind spun with uncertainties. As he stood before the threshold, he, too, felt the weight of a choice forming. What lies would he have to face? As he stepped into the room beyond, the air grew dense, charged with an electric tension. The shadows converged, swirling like a tempest around him. Whatever he was about to discover would change everything. What would he find in the heart of the plant? Would he walk away understanding the truth, or was he walking into a trap laid long ago? The room loomed like an ancient creature, breathing down on him as Eric crossed the threshold. The fluorescent buzz buzzed angrily overhead, shadows painted their deceptive stories on the walls, and the cold air clung to him like a second skin. Eric swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, but curiosity and dread locked him in place. That he swung the flashlight, cutting through the haze. His breath quickened. The room was cluttered with old machinery, but there was something else, an altar of sorts, draped with frayed wires and rust-colored sheets that looked disturbingly like fabric. The atmosphere thickened, almost choking him, and he stepped forward as if compelled. Then he saw it. A circular device at the center of the floor flickered ominously, glowing an otherworldly blue. It pulsed like a heartbeat, sending a wave of energy that resonated through his body. Was it a reactor? Some forgotten part of the plant's legacy? A trap meant to ensnare souls like his? His thoughts raced. He had to know. Eric approached, driven by that seductive allure of the unknown mixed with a primal fear. The faces from the walls pressed at the edge of his mind, their screams echoing in the hall of his consciousness. Were they warning him? Pleading? "Listen to us," a chorus echoed, chilling his spine. Eric crouched beside the device, its humming now shouting promises and dangers. He could make out inscriptions written in a language he didn't understand, but the symbols twisted with familiar shapes. They resembled the warning labels scattered throughout the plant. "What the hell is this?" he muttered aloud. All he wanted was answers, yet they danced just out of his grasp. Suddenly, the walls trembled, steel pipes vibrating like strings pulled too tight. An anguished scream erupted from the depths of the plant, raw and filled with pain as it split the air. Panic clawed at him, but his feet refused to move. The doorway he had come through flickered like a dying flame, and shadows slithered closer, shadowy tendrils grasping at him, whispering in tones that twisted his stomach. "Choose," they hissed. "Choose." His heart hammered in his chest, a primal drum beat roaring in his ears. He could flee and perhaps escape whatever this was, but a deeper voice whispered of responsibility. The workers who had come before him, those trapped in the plant's mechanical maw, would they be freed? Could he take that risk? As he wrestled with the weight of that choice, the device flickered wildly, sending shards of electric light dancing across the room. In a heartbeat, it illuminated a figure behind him. He spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the shadows, but nothing was there. Thoughts raced. Was he truly alone? Or had the spirits of the damned summoned him forth to fulfill their desperate wishes? Eric, a familiar voice echoed. His own name. The sound sent ice through his veins. He turned back to the device, the pulsating blue now swirling faster, casting eerie shadows that morphed into tormenting faces. He ran his fingers across the device's surface, feeling the heat radiate back. The weight of a choice, the unbearable truth of what this was now pressed down on him like a collapsing black hole. He had to act. But what action could lead him to salvation, and what would seal his doom? And as if in answer, the device surged, brightening with a startling intensity. Save us drifted through the air, more an order than a plea. Eric stepped back instinctively, eyes wide. He took one last look at the ancient machine, realizing in a gut-wrenching moment that whatever he chose next would reverberate throughout his soul, linking him to this horror forever. Was he ready to unlock the secrets of the buried pain, or would he just be another faint whisper lost to the shadows? With sweat trickling down his brow, he steadied his breath. The moment had come just then, the lights flickered, taking him back to the dark corridor behind him. Something was moving. He was not as alone as he thought. What no, who was waiting for him just beyond the threshold? Eric's heart raced as he shifted his stance, trying to pierce the darkness behind him. The air had grown colder, a biting chill that gnawed at him, making him acutely aware that something was lurking just out of reach. The shadows twisted like live creatures, and the incessant humming from the machine felt like a taunt, urging him to act. "Who's there?" Eric called, his voice trembling as it echoed through the sterile hall. He gripped the flashlight tighter, its beam wavering as he fought against the encroaching dread. The laughter of the shadows tickled his ears, a cold reminder of the whispers that circled his mind. Then he heard a soft, rustling noise coming from the darkness. It sounded almost human, but different. Discordant. Eric's instincts blared a warning siren, a primal fear wrapping him in its suffocating embrace. He took a cautious step back, his breath hitching in his throat. "Please, save us," the voice came again, this time clearer, wrapping around him like a ghostly shroud. It struck a chord deep within, igniting a memory, a face melted away in an unseen fire, a name lost to time. The echoes of this world colliding with moments he might never have known. Then he saw it, a shadowy figure took shape in the corner of the beam, eyes gleaming like dying embers. Eric's heart lurched. The figure seemed to hover, a diaphanous silhouette that melded into the dark with a grace that both captivated and terrified him. Eric, the figure reached out, a skeletal hand extending toward him, fingers gnarled and blackened. "You must choose for us." Eric stumbled back, trying to grasp the reality of what he was facing. "Who are you? What do you want?" The chilling sensation of confinement pressed against his chest, as if the very air around him bore down with a weighty purpose. The figure's lips moved, but the words were drowned beneath a cacophony of whispers. "We're trapped, buried beneath the reactor it consumes. Save us." Eric desperately sought the path to safety, to clarity, but all he found was chaos. His mind screamed for answers, burning questions, now a firestorm roaring through him. Who were these souls bound to the darkness? What had happened to them? The device's glow pulsed like a heartbeat beneath his fingertips, casting blinding light up against the walls and illuminating faces he wished he could forget. Fragments of memories flooded in. A workplace accident failed to be buried beneath bureaucracy, lives lost to negligence. The guilt clawed at him with cruel talons. "Eric, you must choose." The voice grew sharper, more insistent, rising above the mounting urgency of the moment. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, the shadows surrounding him swirling into a vortex of slick despair. The device surged with energy, and the walls of the room began to warp, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to bend. A terrifying thought flickered to life in his mind. What if he chose to save them? What if he failed? "No!" he shouted, voice breaking. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head as if to drive away the voices, the faces, the torturous pleas. Then, as quickly as it had begun, silence enveloped him. The shadows halted, suspended as if waiting for an answer. The glowing device dimmed, casting the room into near total darkness. In that moment, he sensed a ripple of despair ripple through the air, intertwining all their fates in a single breath. The tension built like a coiled spring, waiting to snap. "Your choice is now," came the voice again, soft and persuasive, laced with an urgency that made him shudder. Eric's hands trembled, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He was standing at the brink of something incomprehensible. Was he ready to unlock the horrors of the past, or would this choice condemn him to the same fate? Just then, the lights flickered back to life, casting a steady glow over the altar. And in that moment, amidst the chaos, he glimpsed them, workers' faces peering through the layers of shadows, their desperate eyes pleading for release. Was there a way out, or were they all trapped together in this nightmare? As he reached for the device once more, the shadows swirled ominously. Eric had to decide fast, because time was running out. The haunting echo of the past thrummed heavily in the air. What would he ultimately choose? And just as that thought settled, the device exploded with blinding light, revealing a new and terrifying reality. The blinding light enveloped Eric, searing into his vision, pushing away the darkness that clung to him like a second skin. For a brief moment, he stood at the center of a universe fully alive, light cascading around him as if the walls were shedding their layers of despair. Then, just as suddenly, the brilliance faded, retreating back into the corners, leaving behind an echo of silence so profound it felt like an audible void. Eric blinked against the newfound gloom, dampening the afterimage of radiance seared on his retinas. Heart pounding, he scanned the room, still gripped by an unshakable anxiety. "Where am I?" he uttered under his breath. The landscape had transformed. Shadows writhed not just along the walls but began to pulse from the floor, something alien knitting together the remnants of the past and present. Desperation clawed at his chest. He was still aboard the reactor floor, but the energy resonating in the air vibrated with a malignant jitter. And then he saw them. The figures were clearer now, materializing slowly from the depths, faces he recognized but had long believed buried. They were the ghostly remnants of the workers, their features etched with agony, eyes blank yet pleading, with wet streaks of sorrow trailing down their cheeks. Each face bore witness to horrors he hadn't wanted to remember. "Eric!" one of them cried, sounding impossibly close, her voice sharp enough to slice through the layers of dread. It was Sarah, a colleague lost in a catastrophic incident, one that had haunted every waking hour since. "Sarah," his voice quaked, a shiver racing down his spine. I thought you were gone." "No, not gone," she insisted, her form flickering like a dying flame. "Trapped. We're trapped here because of you." "Me?" he gasped, the accusation striking like a bitter wind. "I didn't no time for excuses." Another voice cut through, a man he recognized from the accident. Kyle's expression was twisted with rage. "You need to make it right. You need to choose." The weight of their words settled heavily on him. He had been wrapped in his own guilt, finding ways to deflect the responsibility. And now, faced with the embodiment of those choices, he felt shamed. What could he possibly do to save them, to save himself? Fragments of the reactor's malfunction swirled in his mind, a worksite culture too proud to admit failure. The truth throbbed, a toxic pulse beneath the layers of neglect and denial. He was caught, suspended between the past and the weight of their present suffering. "Choose." They echoed again, eyes wide with urgency. He staggered back, glancing helplessly at the device lying amidst the chaos. Its glowing symbols pulsed ominously, like a heartbeat that reached out to entwine with his own. Save or condemn? Eric barely breathed, his pulse hammering like a war drum. Each choice felt heavy with ramifications, steeped in lives unlived. With shaky hands, he gripped the device, the metal cool against his palm, the reality of what it represented crashing over him like an ocean wave, and as his fingers danced across its intricate controls, the device began to whir, its pitches rising and falling. "Save us!" came the harmonized pleas again, a cacophony of shared despair swelling in the air. "Please, Eric." Sarah's form flickered, her face twisting with urgent hope. "You hold the key. You can set us free. But before he could press a button, the ground rumbled anew, shaking from the core. The shadows writhed violently, working against him, an unstoppable force demanding he relinquish control. Fear tore through him, he was precariously balancing on the very edge of all their fates. Help us! The imploring screams echoed, resonating with pain and desperation. Eric faltered, paralyzed, now staring at the device, visions of his own life flashing before him. Each memory screamed for attention, the choices he had to make, the people who had depended on him, the fear of consequences that loomed in the shadows. With time slipping through his fingers like sand, he knew he had a decision to make, but in that moment of horror and revelation, a new truth pierced him. Was he truly strong enough to confront the darkness, or would he drown alongside their echoing cries? Eric drew a trembling breath, spirit steeling against the overwhelming tide. The shadows shifted ominously, forcing him to act. As the vibrations intensified, one final thought pierced through the chaos: what would finally happen if he pressed that button? With every heartbeat, the answer seemed closer yet more elusive, and the shadows, alive with anticipation, urged him toward an unspeakable edge. The air was thick with tension as Eric grappled with the gravity of the moment. The whispers of the shadows echoed louder, a relentless chorus of torment rising from the ground. Choose, they chanted, their voices mingling with the low growl of the reactor's core. It felt like a storm, a cacophony of memories and regrets crashing down on him. His heartbeat quickened, instinct urging him to flee, to abandon the swirling chaos around him. Each breath fueled a sense of panic that squeezed his chest tighter. But then he saw Sarah's ghostly form, flickering in and out, her pleading eyes cutting through the dark. He remembered her laughter, her fierce passion for their work. The memory bit into him, stinging with guilt over her fate. "Please, I can't lose you again," he finally whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible over the clamor of despair. Sarah's face softened, sadness washing over her features. "It's not about losing us, Eric. It's about saving us. You have the power to end this cycle of darkness. Will you do it?" He looked away, momentarily lost in the weight of her words. The device pulsed gently in his hands, slick and foreboding. What if by choosing to save them, he condemned himself? What if the shadows were right, and this was all a trap, cruelly designed to ensnare him in yet another cycle of regret? Just then, Kyle, his ghostly visage contorted with rage, stepped forward. "You can't be weak now. Remember what they took from us. Make the choice." Their words wrapped around him like chains, forcing him to confront the truth he had buried under layers of denial. He thought back to the day everything changed, the warning signs ignored, the voices silenced. He could still hear the roar of the reactor, the moment before everything turned dark. "Those choices are on you," a voice narrated from the depths of the shadows, cutting through Eric's turmoil like a blade. He spun around but saw no one there, just that suffocating darkness. "Do you think you can escape this? Do you think you can forget?" "No." Eric shouted into the abyss, his voice raw. Desperation echoed back, an ominous whisper of doubt spiraling around him. The shadows twisted closer, looming like vengeful spirits angry at being abandoned. Suddenly, the ground quaked violently, the reactor's core blazing alive with energy. The device in his hands shook, the symbols glowing brighter, a beacon amidst the encroaching gloom. "This is your moment, Eric. Now!" Sarah urged, her flame flickering. He steeled himself, fingers poised above the device's controls. What if pressing it meant unraveling everything he knew? But what if it was the only choice that could set them free? "Save us!" they cried again, the desperation fierce in their voices. With a final pulse of courage igniting within him, he pressed down. The machine whirred to life, lights pulsing in a symphony of color as energy surged into reality. The shadows shrieked and twisted in response, battering against the walls of the reactor, and for a moment, Eric felt as if he were standing at the center of a storm. But even as hope sparked within him, he sensed something else lurking, deep within the swirling chaos. A dark presence, something he hadn't expected. "What have you done?" A voice, smooth yet sinister, crept through the walls, freezing his blood. Eric's breath hitched as he realized with dawning horror the true nature of his choice. The energy thrumming through the device began to warp, shifting from salvation to something dreadful. Before he could react, tendrils of shadow shot toward him, wrapping around his arms, pulling him into the depths of despair. A haunting laugh echoed in the air, drowning out all the other voices, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. With one fleeting thought, Eric realized he had just opened the door to something far worse than he had ever imagined. What lay beyond that door? And who would truly pay the price? The shadows tightened their grip around Eric, cold and constricting. Panic surged within him, clawing at his insides as he fought against the darkness. The laughter echoed, reverberating through the reactor's core like a siren's call, pulling him deeper into fear. Breaths came in gasps, his chest tight like a vice, heart racing, each thump echoing in his ears as he struggled to break free. "What are you?" he shouted, his voice trembling. He felt small, powerless against the approaching tide of despair. He needed answers. He needed hope. With a sudden jolt, the light from the device pulsed with ferocity, spilling color across the darkened walls. It felt alive, vibrating with energy that contrasted the choking bleakness surrounding him. Yet the shadows laughed louder, mocking him for his feeble resistance. Their voices intertwined, revealing the pain hidden beneath their malice. "You opened the floodgates, Eric," they hissed. "You cannot hide." Against the biting chill, a small voice inside him fought to remember what had Sarah said. This wasn't he just about condemning himself. He had the chance to save them. But at what cost? A flicker of familiarity sparked in his mind. A memory. Sarah's determination during those frantic hours before the reactor went live, that same determination that had drawn him to her. She believed in him. "I have to believe, too," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper, tenacious hope cutting through his fear. With newfound resolve, he focused on the device in his hands. Tendrils of shadow lashed out again, furious at his defiance. He flinched, every muscle in his body tensed, but he also felt something deep within him, an ember of courage igniting. "You're not going to win," he yelled, pressing the device's restraints hard into his palms. The shadows screamed, a cacophony of rage swirling around him as the energy from the reactor surged at his command. But even as he felt its power flow through him, Eric knew he was only delaying the inevitable. Each pulse pulsed hot, and the shadows spiraled closer, howling their discontent. He wasn't fighting them alone. "Sarah, Kyle, help me!" he cried out, voice rising above the chaos. Suddenly, it was as if their spirits ignited with his plea. Echoes of laughter and joy twisted through the darkness, mixing with his desperation, and he could almost see them manifesting, faint glimmers of hope flickering into being. Together. Sarah's voice rang clear, and he felt her presence surround him, a warm light against the ever-encroaching shadows. "We're here with you, Eric." As they surged forward, the shadows recoiled momentarily, and Eric seized the chance. He activated the device with renewed urgency, channeling every ounce of his will into it. The symbols blazed bright, illuminating the darkness, washing over him in waves, both uplifting and terrifying. But as the weight of the shadows thinned, a foreboding tremor coursed through the floor, igniting alarms that shrieked in protest. The very foundations of the reactor trembled, a warning surge coursing beneath him, threatening to unravel both the physical and spectral realms. "What have you set in motion?" the smooth voice teased, cold like a serpent's kiss, edging closer. Eric's heart sank. Something far darker stirred within the shadows, a force far beyond their grief and fury. It was self-awareness, a malicious intelligence brewing beneath the cries. He had tapped into something deeper than he could handle. Suddenly, the reactor blared a warning, flashing crimson light stop. He felt the ground shift, a violent thrust catapulting him into the air. What lay ahead was no longer just a choice, it was a battle for existence itself. For Sarah, for Kyle, for himself. As he clung desperately to the device, Eric realized that he was not merely seeking to save them. He was awakening something, a force they could never hope to control, and in that heart-stopping moment, the shadows whispered again. There's a price to pay, Eric, and it's your turn to face the truth. What would the reckoning be? And could he survive the darkness he dared to unleash? The reactor erupted into chaos around Eric, alarms blaring like banshees weeping for a lost soul. The light from the device pulsed in wild rhythms, clashing with the shadows that enveloped him, creating a grotesque ballet of darkness and luminescence. He was suspended in a moment that felt both timeless and fleeting, hanging on the precipice of oblivion. The tremors intensified, shaking him to the core. Eric's heart thudded in his chest, each beat a reminder of his fragility among the monstrous forces uncoiling within the shadows. What had he unleashed? A deep, primal fear clawed at him, demanding escape. But there was no escape. The decision had to be made here and now. The walls of the reactor began to crack under the strain, fissures slithering across the surface like venomous snakes. Eric breathed deeply, trying to center himself against the surging tide of despair. I can't let them down, he thought, recalling the resolve in Sarah's eyes when they first spoke of the reactor. She had faith, unwavering faith, and his was faltering. Eric. Sarah's voice cut through the static, clear and bright amidst the darkness. Don't you dare give up. He clenched the device tighter, the cool metal biting into his palms, grounding him. Together, he echoed her words, the warmth of their memories melting the creeping frost of fear. The shadows snarled, a sinister melody rising around him. They were angry. Furious at his defiance. The darkness surged forward, flowing like water, threatening to engulf him whole. In that instant, Eric unleashed every ounce of will he possessed. Let there be light. He hollered, channeling his determination through the device. The reactor hummed in response, vibrations coursing through his body as fiery light erupted from the device, white-hot and brilliant. The shadows recoiled as if scalded, their whispers transforming into guttural howls, a chorus of terror that rattled Eric to his bones, but the alarm screeched louder still, drowning out everything. Red lights spiraled in maddening patterns, and the control panels erupted in sparks, sending plumes of smoke swirling into the air. Panic clenched at Eric's gut as the floor quaked beneath him. Shut it down. A voice shouted from the command center, brittle and frantic. It was Kyle, desperation cracking through. The reactor can't handle this power. It'll blow. Eric's grip slackened for a heartbeat. The realization froze him. He was pulling energy from the very heart of the reactor, energy that was never meant to be controlled this way. The shadows were creatures born from despair, yes, but less of spirits and more of chaotic energy. They were the embodiment of everything Eric feared, swirling along with the surge of power he de-summoned. With a jolt, he thought of Sarah and Kyle, who stood together against the odds. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for them. What were they risking? Sacrificing? I want to do it, he shouted, defiance screeching against the trying winds of dread. I refuse to let the darkness win. The device crackled to life, sinking to the pulsing rhythm of the reactor, and he pushed the limits. The energy grew, swirling and flickering dangerously, teetering on the edge of catastrophe. Eric felt the shadows twisting and snarling around him, desperation clawing at their forms as if trying to hold on to their last threads of existence. Would he unleash a force that could consume them all? Or could he reshape the darkness, transform their bitterness into something beautiful? Trust me, he whispered to their anguished cries. Let us turn this around. But as the shadows began to relent, a new darkness rippled through the scene, a cold, calculated presence, something large looming in the backdrop, its whispers seeping into his mind with a chilling promise. You still don't understand, do you, Eric? You're not the only one with power, and that realization hit harder than anything before. Almost instinctively, fear began to creep back in, but Eric fought to harden his resolve. Face me, he challenged the unseen presence in the void. As the darkness stirred behind him, anticipation hung heavy in the air. What other secrets would this place reveal? What else had he awakened that lay in wait, biding its time? The shadows hesitated, and for the first time, doubt flickered within their depths. Could he do the impossible? The reactor wailed in response, and Eric braced himself for the storm that was about to break. The reactor roared, a titan clashing in the throes of chaos. Shadowy tendrils writhed around Eric, but he stood tall, drawing strength from the memories of those lost. Their faces flickered in his mind: Sarah, Kyle, the countless others, their eyes pleading for him to act. Together, we'll break this cycle. He shouted, transcendently aware that this moment could tilt the scale of fate. He pressed down on the device, coaxing its brilliance to break through the darkness. The light surged forth, fierce and unyielding, casting aside shadows that had claimed too many lives, but the darkness was not going to surrender that easily. A growl rolled from its depths, a voice slipping through the cracks, smooth yet venomous. You are a fool, Eric. You will unleash more than you can control. He felt it, an oppressive weight bearing down on him as the reactor quaked violently, jagged bursts of energy igniting the air with chaos. Shadows danced and swirled, and that familiar coldness seeped into his skin, urging him to back down. But he couldn't. He thought of Sarah's smile, of Kyle's infectious laughter. They had endured this agony, he wouldn't let it chain them forever. No! Eric bellowed, forcing himself forward, his resolve unwavering. I want to let you take them, I want to let you take me. The device pulsed like a heartbeat between his palms, resonating with a power that felt otherworldly. As he focused on the light, he envisioned not only saving those trapped but also unlocking their potential to shape a future beyond despair. The shadows roared in fury, attacking him with whispers and doubts, trying to derail his resolve. You can't save them all. They hissed. They are as bound to this darkness as you are. It will consume you too. But Eric held firm. I choose light. He cried, every ounce of his being infusing that statement with truth. Suddenly, the shadows shrank away, recoiling as rays of brilliance erupted from the device, spreading like wildfire through the reactor. Light collided with shadows in a cataclysmic struggle that rattled the very foundations of the plant. He could feel the collective strength of lost souls rallying behind him: Sarah, Kyle, and others drawing near, their spirits intertwined with his determination. He wasn't just a man standing alone against darkness, they were a force. Visions rushed back at him: the tragedy of neglect, the memories of laughter echoing through break rooms, heartbeats of camaraderie that had once flourished in the very halls he now fought to reclaim. I will not run from this. He shouted into the chaotic storm around him. You are not stronger than us. Just then, as light exploded, he sensed that the dark entity faltered, a dissonance creeping into its whispers. The shadows split, unraveling around him as the light surged brighter, forcing their grasp away from his body. Time slowed, his heart raced in sync with the pulsing device as blinding brightness enveloped them all. Eric felt weightlessness, as if the ground had vanished. He was no longer tethered to the terrible past, he was finally free. With the final burst of energy, the darkness shattered, a splintering breaking apart like glass, revealing a new dawn, a renewed energy that surged through the reactor, catching sparks in the air. It was not simply a restoration, it was rebirth. As the light cascaded across the walls, the faces of those he fought for appeared, illuminated in hope. Sarah smiled, her form radiant with gratitude. Thank you, Eric, she whispered, her voice a gentle promise carried away on the winds of transformation. Eric stood surrounded by brilliant light, the shadows gone, the oppressive stillness of dread replaced with an exhilarating expanse of possibility. He had chosen wisely and burned through the stranglehold of despair binding them all. Every person that had whispered from the past was now set free, moving on to peace as if a great weight had been lifted. Eric's heart swelled with relief. They were no longer trapped, he had saved them all. He turned back to the pulsing device, its glow now steady, no longer dimmed by fear. He knew he had made the right choice. Standing in the reactor's light, he embraced the truth that these horrors are not meant to dwell in shadows forever. Instead, they could weave into bright threads of hope and understanding, pulling us together rather than allowing us to fall apart, and with that final wave of realization, he breathed deep, lifting his chin with newfound purpose. He would share this light, and these lessons would radiate far beyond the walls of the plant. The reactor hummed softly, a lullaby of peace thriving in a place once consumed by despair. Eric stepped back, turning away from the remnants of darkness, ready to share his story, for them, for himself, for every soul ever lost in shadow, and as he left, the dawn broke beyond the horizon, heralding not just a new day, but a new way of life. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss the next jaw-dropping story that will shake your world. This is the moment to show your support. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and help others join our incredible community. What did you think of this electrifying conclusion? Flood the comments section with your thoughts and theories, and do not wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to know how enduring hope can conquer fear. Your support means everything. Let's spread the light together.